Hello everyone, welcome to the PMP Exam Question and Answers solving session for April. Now, as you are aware, the syllabus and the format of the PMP exam is changing from July 2026. So if you are a PMP exam aspirant, you should make every effort to clear the exam before the format changes takes into effect. And that means to give your best to prepare and pass the exam within June 2026. And this video will help you to do that. So just like the previous months, we would be solving 5 medium to high difficulty level PMP exam style questions as per the current exam format, which is valid till June 2026 in this video. And for each of the 5 questions, we would be doing a detailed explanation on the correct and the incorrect answer choices. The intent of this exercise is firstly to test how well you are prepared for the PMP exam. So for example, you can use this scorecard that you see on screen to test and assess your performance across the 5 questions. And secondly, the goal of this exercise is to develop your understanding on the correct process and strategy to solve PMP exam questions efficiently on your actual exam day. So please give this video a like and let's get started with question number 1.
Right, so question number 1, the drill will remain the same as per the previous monthly sessions. So please pause the video and try to answer the question first before we solve this together. Right, so here's the situation, right? A PM on an ERP implementation project had already identified the risk of losing their lead systems integration architect. Now, and sure enough, it happens that the architect is hospitalized right in the middle of a critical configuration phase. Now, the question is, what does the PM do first? So let's walk through the options one by one. So option B says revise the project management plan and realign the schedule. Now, that might seem reasonable on the surface, but if you really think about it, why would you start reworking the plan before even checking whether you already have a plan for this exact situation, right? So that's just jumping ahead without doing a proper due diligence before. And if you do that action, you may end up doing some highly unnecessary rework, okay? So that is why option B is the incorrect answer choice. Let's look at option C, which suggests removing the affected activities from scope after talking to the stakeholders. Well, that doesn't make sense at all, does it? Because scope decisions are quite serious and you don't start cutting deliverables the moment a resource goes on leave for whatever reason, right? So that's a pure overreaction by a project manager. And frankly, it could cause far more damage to the project than the risk itself. So option C is also incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says update the lessons learned register and risk log. Now, if you think about it, logging a risk that has materialized, it's important, yes, okay, but doing that first before taking any action, that's really putting documentation ahead of delivery, okay? And if you go by the PMI principles, that always advocates against documentation prioritized before delivery, okay? Because if you think about it, the project is in trouble right now. And what you need to do is you need to act first before you document. And that is why if you see the question stem, it is categorically asking that what should the PM do first, okay? So the first thing is not about updating the lessons learned repository because you have not really closed out the issue successfully yet, okay? And if you have not closed out an issue successfully, what lessons learned update will you do, okay? So that is why option D is also incorrect. So the correct answer to this question is option A, and this is where good risk management really pays off, okay? A well-prepared project manager doesn't wait for a crisis to figure out what to do, okay? They ideally has to plan it in advance. The risk register isn't just really a list, okay? It contains pre-approved response strategies for exactly these moments in time, which might catch you off guard whilst you are in the execution stage of a project. So when the risk was identified, the response might have been, let's say, a backup resource, an outsourced vendor contract, or let's say a knowledge transfer protocol. So whatever it is was captured as part of your risk response is the action you need to execute first, okay? So think about it. This is the entire point of proactive risk management, right? You have already done the thinking. Now you just follow the plan. And the PMBOK is really very clear on this as well, okay? Because it mentions that when a risk event occurs, the first action is to implement the planned risk response after reviewing the risk register, okay? So everything else, which is, let's say, schedule updates, stakeholder conversations, lessons learned updates, documentation follows from there, okay? So the correct answer to this question is option A.
Now, if you are preparing for the PMP exam in 2026, I would suggest that you check out my PMP exam preparation courses on Udemy. All the courses are very highly rated amongst the students, and many PMP exam aspirants have passed the PMP exam with the help of these courses. And just to assure you, all the courses are fully updated and compliant as per the current version of the PMP exam, which will stay in effect till June 2026. You will find all the relevant links in the description section of this video. And now let's move on to question number 2.
So question number 2, please pause the video and try to answer the question first before we solve this together. So here is the picture. A Scrum team is delivering a patient portal sprint by sprint, but the clinical director, who is essentially the product owner, keeps missing the sprint reviews. And because of that, rework keeps piling up. The question is, what should the PM do? So let's go through the options one by one. So if you look at option A, it suggests inviting the clinical director to daily stand-ups. Now think about it. Daily stand-ups are for the delivery team, right? They are short, tactical, team-focused ceremonies. Now, pulling a senior clinical director into daily stand-ups isn't realistic, and honestly, it's not their productive use of time as well, okay? And that's not how you really solve an availability problem, because the moment you call a senior clinical director in a daily stand-up, that is pure escalation, okay? And that should be avoided. So option A is incorrect. So let's look at option C, which says ask the clinical director to lock all the requirements at the start of each sprint. Well, that doesn't really make sense at all, okay? Because that's almost a waterfall mindset creeping into an agile project. So agile, if you think about it, expects requirements to evolve, right? So freezing them at the start of the sprint defeats the entire purpose of iterative delivery, which is the crux of agile way of working. So option C is also incorrect. Let's look at option D, which suggests letting the clinical director review deliverables whenever they are free. Now, really, that's just leaving the problem to sort it out for itself, right? So no structure, no planning, no accountability. Outright and incorrect answer choice. So the correct answer to this question is option B, and this is where proactive stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement comes in. A good PM doesn't just accept that a key stakeholder is unavailable, right? They really plan around it. Maybe that means scheduling sprint reviews weeks in advance. Maybe it means sending recorded demos with structured feedback forms for offline reviews. Or maybe it means identifying a delegate who can represent the clinical director. The point is, you find a way that works for both the team and the stakeholder. And PMI is very, very clear that stakeholder engagement is a planned, structured activity and not a reactive one. And that is why option B is the correct answer choice for this question.
Now, before we move on to question number 3, I would like to introduce you to my PMP exam study group on YouTube. It's a monthly subscription-based study group where I share daily tips on highly nuanced topics and strategies to help you pass the PMP exam. The fees are very nominal. You can try it for a month or so and you will be able to see a dramatic improvement in the way you approach to solve PMP exam questions. Feedback from students for this study group has been excellent. You will find the link to join the study group in the description section of this video in case you are interested. So now let's move on to question number 3.
Right, so question number 3, please pause the video and try to answer the question first before we solve this together. So here is what's happening, right? The sales director and the head of operations are in a heated dispute during a program board meeting over competing priorities for a CRM rollout. Now, both are influential and both control budget and resources. And the PM is right there in the room. And how should you react, or what should you do as the PM as your first line of action in this situation. So let's go through the options one by one. Now, option B says escalate to the program sponsor. Now you think about it, escalation is really the last resort, right, for any kind of situation which you are handling as a PMI certified project manager, not a first response. The PM hasn't even attempted to handle this yet. So going straight to the sponsor signals that you can't manage your own stakeholders. And that's not a great image to have in front of your program sponsor. So that is why option B is an incorrect answer choice. Let's look at option D, which says use your project management authority or PM authority to make the final prioritization call. Now, does it really make sense? Two very, very senior, highly influential stakeholders are clashing over strategic priorities, and the project manager is going to override both of them. That is really, really unrealistic in a real organizational scenario. Okay. A PM, with all due respect, simply does not have a mandate in such a situation where two very highly senior stakeholders are debating on a topic and the PM just can't override it. Okay, plain and simple. So option D is also incorrect. Let's look at option C, and this is a tricky one, and it is the very, very close answer choice, but it's an incorrect answer choice as well. Okay, and I'll tell you why. So refocus on objectives and facilitate a compromise. Now, sort of that feels right, doesn't it? Very collaborative, very PMI-ish, okay? But here's the thing. If you facilitate a compromise without first understanding what's actually driving each stakeholder's position, you are essentially guessing, okay? Now, if you are guessing without the right data point, you might sort of try to have an agreement that neither party is truly satisfied with, okay? And the conflict has a very high chance of resurfacing later. Okay, so just because an option suggests that it's very collaborative and very sort of PMI-ish and very diplomatic doesn't really mean that it is the correct answer choice. And you have to keep this nuance in mind when you are solving PMP questions in your actual exam. So option C is a very close answer choice, but it's an incorrect answer choice. So the correct answer to this question is option A, and this is the classic PMI thinking. Before you act, you gather data. And we have discussed this countless number of times over the previous Q&A sessions. So if you have not watched those previous videos, I would highly recommend that you go and watch those previous Q&A videos, the monthly ones, which I have been publishing in this channel for more than 2 years now, because you need to understand that what the sales director is really worried about in this situation, right? And also you need to know what's driving the head of operations. So you need to understand those nuances for those senior level stakeholders. So these are really separate conversations, privately held separately, where each person can speak candidly without being judged and without sort of creating an altercation or escalation in front of the other party. Now, once you have that understanding, then you facilitate it meaningfully. Okay. And if you think about it, a doctor doesn't really prescribe a medicine before a diagnosis, right? And in the same analogy, neither should a project manager do that as well. So that is why option A is the correct answer choice to this question.
Right. Let's now move on to question number 4.
Right, so question number 4, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. So here's the scenario. A project manager sits in a meeting with the head of engineering and they discuss a change to a software deployment workstream. And then the project manager goes off and tells the team leader to complete the paperwork. Now, sounds straightforward, right? But if you look at it very carefully, it's a bit more on what actually is visible on the surface. Okay, so let's go through the options one by one. Option A says that it is management focus on scope control and governance. Now that doesn't really make sense because scope control involves formal processes like tracking changes against the baseline, assessing the impact, getting approvals, basically the overall change management procedure, right? Simply relaying an instruction to fill out a paperwork is not really scope governance, okay? That's just communication, and that is why option A is incorrect. Let's look at option B, which says this is management planning in action. Now, if you think about it, planning involves developing strategies, right? Sequencing works, allocating resources, preparing budgets, getting approvals for budget, etc., etc. Now, nothing in this scenario resembles planning in its farthest or remotest form because the decision has already been made and the PM is just communicating it downstream. And that is why option B is also incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says that it's a formal change control system. Now, okay, if you think about it, a change control system is a structured process involving impact assessments, change control boards, documented approvals, which means the entire perform integrated change control system as PMI sort of advocates in the PMBOK guide. But what we see here is one person telling another person to fill out a paperwork, which is of course necessary, but that's not really a system, right? That's a conversation or a communication. So that is why option D is also incorrect. So the correct answer to this question, you'll be surprised that it is option C, okay? And that is a really important PMI concept which you need to know for your PMP exam. A project expediter is a role, okay? It's not a job title. Now, fair enough, many candidates think of it as a separate person, that there is someone standing in your project management office who has this title of project expediter, but that's not quite right, okay? In smaller organizations, a PM can themselves act in the expediter role, just as a PM can sometimes act in the project coordinator role as well, okay? So it is the role shift which you need to understand, okay? Not the job title. So the key characteristic of this expediter role is not really decision making authority, okay, but it is a role which is simply acting as a communication link and carrying the decisions made by others and passing instructions and communications downstream. And it's a very, very important role, okay, and it's not really a role which you should look down upon thinking that okay, it's a expediter, so I can live without them as well. Wrong, okay, because even if you take a decision, there has to be a communication channel to communicate that decision downstream, right? Now you as a project manager can be the expediter and can do that downstream communication, but that role needs to be executed by someone, okay? And this is exactly what is happening here. The head of engineering and the project manager discussed the change, but the project manager didn't decide anything independently, okay? They took off the PM hat, put on the hat of the project expediter, and communicated the outcome to the team leader, okay? So once the PM is on the project expediter hat, no authority is really exercised, okay? There is no judgment also that is really applied. It is purely communication, okay? And that is what you need to understand about the overall role of a project expediter in an overall project management landscape. So the correct answer to this question is option C.
Next, moving on to question number 5. Remember, the target is to get all the 5 out of the 5 questions correct, okay? However, the minimum expectation is that you will get at least 4 out of the 5 questions correct to consider yourself fairly well prepared for the PMP exam. You can assess your level of preparation according to this scorecard. So here comes question number 5.
Right, so question number 5, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Right, so here is the situation. An agile delivery lead notices the team flagging delays during stand-up, unclear API specifications, dependency bottlenecks, etc., etc. They work with the product owner on feature clarity, which is fine, but then they tell the team to fast track everything, okay? And what really happens? Fewer features delivered, defect rates are climbing, and something which is not clearly right, okay? So let's look at the options one by one to understand what should the delivery lead have done instead. So option A says, ask the team to log impediments for the next sprint planning. The team is struggling right now, so deferring impediments to a future planning session while the sprint is actively suffering is not really a problem that you are trying to solve, right? That's postponing a problem. Now the team needs support at this moment in time, okay? Not really a document update. So that is why option A is an incorrect answer choice. Now let's look at option C. which says add impediments as backlog items to be fixed later. Now again, on similar lines, that doesn't really make sense as well, because impediments are not really features, right? They don't belong in the product backlog, and mixing operational blockers with deliverable work items clearly puts the backlog and the overall, let's say, the user story list. Now, mixing operational blockers with deliverable work items mishmashes the backlog overall and signals a fundamental misunderstanding of the agile structure. And again, you are prioritizing documentation over action, which ideally should be avoided. Now, let's look at option B. And look, this is where it gets genuinely tricky, okay? Because option B is a very close answer choice, but it's an incorrect one, okay? Because option B says guide the team towards targeted solutions that remove impediments. Now, on the surface, that sounds really good, doesn't it? Almost a textbook way of managing an issue. But here is the critical distinction. Who is actually solving the problem here? If the delivery lead is directing the solution, okay, identifying the fixes and handling them to the team, that is still a top-down directive approach, okay, and it's not really servant leadership. And that is really just a polished version of telling people what to do, saying that, okay, I am not directing you, but I am guiding you to something which I have already decided for you. Okay, so that's not really servant leadership. And that is why option B, though it has the word guided, it also has that phrase which mentions targeted solutions, okay, which means that solutions has already been decided without involving the team, and you are now directly sort of deploying it. And that is why option B is an incorrect answer choice, but it's a very, very close answer choice. And the correct answer to this question is option D, and this is the heart of agile leadership. A servant leader's job is not to solve problems for the team, okay? It is to create the conditions where the team can solve the problems themselves and be a self-sufficient team, okay? So as a servant leader, you need to empower them. You need to trust them. Give them the autonomy to improve their own ways of working and their own tools and their interactions. So if you think about it, a self-organizing team that owns its own impediments will outperform a directed team every single time, because the moment teams are directed by someone else, all the challenges and all the impediments also becomes the problem of the person who is directing it, and the team doesn't really learn to take ownership of their decisions or be accountable. And that is why PMI is very clear on this, that the agile leader should be wearing the hat of a coach and a facilitator and a servant leader, not the hat of a dictatorial leader who takes the decisions themselves and sort of then deploys it with the team. And that is why option D is the correct answer choice to this question.
I hope you liked the session, guys. Please press the like button and subscribe to this channel if you really feel that this session has helped you in your PMP exam preparation journey. And I'll see you again in the next video.